Join Speaking of Spirits as we discuss some of our favorite ghost stories. Hey everybody, this is Colleen with Speaking of Spirits, and I'm here with Kelly tonight.
Hey everybody.
And we're doing an audio podcast this time instead of a video. We're just having some technical issues. So today's audio only, but we'll get back to video here soon. And today we wanted to talk about kind of ghost stories. And Kelly had some ghost stories he wanted to share with us tonight. So, and I've got a few, but I wanted to hear yours, Kelly.
Which one should I start out with?
The creepier, the better.
The gas station one, or working at Pokey High?
Well, everybody is familiar around here with Pokey High, so why don't you start with that?
Okay, so this was about 20-something years ago. I am in between jobs, and one of my friends is like, well, why don't you just apply to work with me over at this custodial place? I'm not going to say the name, but I'm like, oh, yeah, okay. And I filled out an application and turned it in, and they're like, okay, well, in about a week, we'll call you if we want you. I'm like, all right, cool. And I'm like, what do you guys all clean? They're like, well, we clean all sorts of buildings around here, but we do mostly schools. And I'm like, what would be the odds that I get to clean my old high school? Turned out pretty darn good, because they called me about a week later, and they're like, okay, the general manager wants to meet you over at Pokey at 6:00. All right, cool. So I go into the parking lot, I go downstairs, and I meet the general manager, and he's like, hi, my name's so-and-so. And then I'm like, oh, all right, cool. He's like, hey, you heard about this place, right? And I'm like, that it's haunted? And he's like, yeah. He's like, just do me a favor. Don't walk out on me. We've lost 2 people already this week. And I'm like, really? And he's like, yeah, let me show you something. And he takes me to this little room that has some desks and computers in it, and an old wood door with a glass panel and the original steps to the school. When they originally built Pokey, the first floor was actually in the basement. So these steps lead up to the main office on the main floor. And he takes me into this classroom, and he's like, a guy was vacuuming, and he turns around, and there he sees a lady's face peeking at him through the glass, staring at him. Freaked him out so bad he left. And I'm like, yeah, that's creepy, but I was still a little, skeptical-ish from hearing all these stories. People are just psychosomatic, right? But after working there for about a week or two, I'd hear doors slam, toilets flush by themselves, and those are the automatic toilets. And one of the security gate in the library would go off at random times, completely random times. But yeah, the one thing that scared and the feeling of always being watched too. But the one thing
Oh,
that really scared the living tar out of me was I was dust mopping, and I got my my broom and my dustpan. I'm bent over to sweep it up. I catch movement out of the corner of my eye. I look up, and there's a shadow of a woman. And being that it's in Old Town, we don't know if somebody snuck in or not. So I'm thinking person, person, person. Uh, Not supposed to be here. It's late at night.
yeah.
But I think person. I look up and I go, oh, it's a shadow, and it's moving towards me, and it's quick. It was fast. Like the whole thing took 3 seconds at most. She was floated down the hallway towards me. As I look up, it's like she saw me, I saw her, and she was like, "Uh oh, I got spotted." Turned and went through a solid wood door into the earth science classroom. Just
Oh,
how it was that quick, and I'm like, nope, nope, done. And I set my stuff down, and I started going down the steps. I wanted to run, and something in my head said, "Don't run. It wants you to run." And I'm like, okay. Now, if you ever seen those steps in Pokey High, they're only about like that, and they're solid concrete. You slip and fall down there, fall down them, you are injured. So I went out, went out outside, found the rest of my coworkers while they were on break, and they're like saw me coming flying out of the building and went and sat next to them, and they're like, "What are you doing here?" I'm like, "I'm not going back in there until you guys go back in there." And I told them what happened. They're like, "Yeah, right, yeah." But that was one of them. The other one was I was working in the auditorium side of Pokey, and I was cleaning one of the stairwells. A friend of mine, the friend that got me hooked up with the job, she's like, "Hey, I'm going on break. I'll be outside." I'm like, "All right, cool. I'm trying to quit smoking, so I'm like, I'll hang back and I'll just finish mopping the stairs or whatever." I hear her go to the closet, shut the closet, go out the front door, and I hear the door shut. So I know she left. And 10 minutes maybe have gone by, and I'm finishing up mopping, and I hear my name in her voice call me from down the hallway over by the band room and the drama room. And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm over here." Uh, no response, no footsteps, no nothing. I'm like, what is going on? Go back to mopping, hear my voice get called out again and asking where am I? And I'm like, "I'm over here." And I'm waiting, no response, nothing. And then it does it again, and I'm like, okay, we're done here. And I'm like, either A, she snuck in somehow past past the doors or whatever thing, and I didn't hear it, and she's pulling a prank on me, and I'm going to get really, really angry at her, or she's still outside. And I went to the closet, I opened it up, or no, actually, I went to the front doors, looked outside to the little smoking corner out there. That's what we called it. Looked out there. She's sitting out there with all my other coworkers. And I said, absolutely not. Nope, we're done. Went to the closet, grabbed my stuff, grabbed her stuff, and I went flying out those doors and down the stairs and started walking towards the rest of them. And man, the look on their face when they see a 6 foot guy big 6 foot guy with a coat, with his coat on, his a girl's coat in one hand and a purse, and I'm fast walking towards him. They were like, "What is going?" They're like, "What are you doing?" And I'm like,
How long ago was this, Kelly?
"It's 20 years ago, maybe, give or take."
Really? It's been that long. Okay. So since then, um do paranormal like apparitions and stuff like that, does that still bother you? Or have you adapted to the
Uh,
paranormal being part of your life?
it got pretty bad for a while. I had a family member kind of flip the switch off because it wasn't good for a while. My the house that used to be next door to us had something in it. It was bizarre. I'd go over and visit with the neighbors every once in a while, and you just walked in, you're just like, oh, okay, nope.
Hmm.
And eventually, it got so dilapidated that the landlord was just like, I'm done messing with it, and they just bulldozed it. And for a while, it was just it felt like there was somebody just around me the whole time, kind of like
Hmm.
pulling your shirt, going, "Hey, hey, hey!" And I'm like, "Knock it off! I want to go to bed. I want to do stuff. Leave me alone." And just
Yeah.
and it got worse when they started uh, laying the foundation out there. They started digging it up, and
Hmm.
it got away. I
Is
couldn't
this an old
sleep.
town? Is
Yeah,
this Old Town? Yeah.
yeah.
Interesting. Huh.
And here's the kicker, though, is that when they were digging it up, I was I couldn't sleep. I missed like a whole night's sleep. And I'm like, this has got to stop. And I go outside to get some air, and there's some workers out there. And this guy's like, "Hey, come here, check this out, see what we found." And I'm walking up, I'm like, "Oh, cool, cool. I like finding stuff." And he opens up his hands, and he's got two different medicine bottles in his hands, two old glass medicine bottles. He's like, "These
Neat.
are cool, huh? Do you want one?" And I looked at him, and something in my brain says, don't touch, back up, don't touch." And I'm like,
Hmm.
"No, you keep them." And yeah, I was just like, "Nope, I have a feeling I take one of those and something's coming home with me," and absolutely not.
Yeah. So, um, I've I think the original Pokey High burned down, right? Almost
Yep.
everything burned down at one time or another
Yeah,
because everything was built with wood back in the day. So,
oh,
yeah,
it did burn down, and they just rebuilt on top of it and just
sure.
kept adding on.
So you got to wonder if the apparition in there that you saw, because you saw a female twice, like a shadow of a female, and then an apparition of a female, right?
I saw an apparition, and then I got voice phenomenon. I didn't see it, but I heard it.
Okay. So a disembodied voice. So I wonder if the female would have been like an old teacher there, somebody who's really attached to the building.
There's the rumor of the librarian. There's actually two stories of the librarian. It wasn't a librarian back then, but that was the library that's there now used to be the original auditorium. And the story goes as is that the librarian there was in love with some guy. They broke up, and she hung herself from the chandelier in
Mm.
the library. There's
Do
another.
you ever look for that, like in papers or anything, in old records?
I haven't. No, no, I haven't.
Mm.
And one of the other stories is that if you go drive around Pokey 3 times, stop in the front of the building where the library is, and honk your horn, she'll look out the window at you.
Oh, oh, I love those old, urban legends. Yeah. So
And
there's supposedly a tunnel. There's a tunnel over by Century High School that goes under the road so that you can go over to those ponds. And
The old highway ponds. Yep.
yeah, the highway ponds, which we get calls every once in a while that handprints, on the bumper of your car, are kind of urban legend out there and stuff like that. If you stop under the bridge and
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
There's another
that
railroad crossing somewhere that's famous for that. You stop, you stop your car, you put it in neutral, and things will push you
yeah.
up and out of the way of that was the railroad tracks in that one, but
Yeah, that's a well, I from what I've researched on that urban legend is that's in Texas.
yeah, it's in
Yeah.
Texas.
Yeah. So it's East Texas that that happens. But so what's your other ghost story?
Um, when I was working at Cowboy Oil, the now defunct Cowboy Oil on Highway 30.
Okay.
Um, uh, I was working, and I usually get off at 10 o'clock. So 9:30 rolls around, and we're waiting. It's 9:45. My coworker at the time, she was a little older, and she's like, I'm out of here. And I'm like, you're not gonna stick around until what's his nuts? I mean, what's his name shows up? And she's like, nah, I'm old. I don't have to. Bye. And she just leaves, and so it's 10 till, and I'm waiting for this guy to come in and relieve me. And not showing up, not showing up. It's 10 o'clock, and I'm like, that's it. I'm calling the boss, and I call him, and he's like, oh, he's just running late. Give him another 10 minutes, and if he's not there, call me back. Okay. Well, that 10 minutes came and went. He didn't show up. I call my boss, and of course, he puts it on voicemail or whatever. Shuts his phone
Yeah.
off. Can't get a hold of him. So I'm like, great. What do I do? Because you got the gas station part, and then behind you, behind that is the diner. And there's no
Hmm.
way to separate the two. I was just thinking, you know what? I'll just get the keys, I'll lock the door, and I'll just leave. And I'll come back at like before 6 in the morning and just drop off the keys. Well, can't do that because there's no barrier in between businesses. So
Oh,
if I left, somebody could just from the diner just come in and just take whatever they wanted, and I'd
right.
be on the hook for it. So I'm like, great. I have to sit here till 6 a.m., 6 or 7. So I'm just sitting there waiting. And about 2:30 rolls around, and 2:30 in the morning, and I was I was coming out of the restroom, and I go and I sit on my stool by the register, and I'm sitting there going, and I catch movement out of my left peripheral. And at the time, if you're sitting behind the cash register, there's a door here and a massive garage bay. And a few weeks
So
prior,
a door to your left, and a garage bay.
a huge garage bay. One was for cars and one was for semis. It was massive.
Oh, okay.
And there was an office back there, and then a small bathroom for truck drivers to get cleaned up, and a couple of storage rooms. And a couple of weeks prior, they moved all the beer coolers into the middle of that bay. So if somebody was back there, you didn't know it until they come around the corner. But I'm sitting there and watching, and I catch movement, and I see somebody come from behind the beer coolers and start coming up towards me in the cash registers. But first, this. I'm like, okay, it's a person, and I'm like watching it come up, and it stops over at the automotive section, and it looks like he pulls out drawers of fuses or light bulbs or whatever they were, and he's picking picking through it. And just then I noticed that's not a person, that's a shadow. And he's just pulling
So
drawers.
could you hear fuses and stuff being moved?
No, that's the thing. And before it registered in my brain that that's not a person, that's a shadow, I turned and I looked at him and I'm like, "Can I help you?" And he turns and he looks at me and he just goes and just
Oh, and he
disappears.
vanished. Wow.
It was like, "Oh, he saw me. He's not supposed to be able to see me," and just boop and disappears. And I'm like, "Well, I'm like, I don't need coffee anymore. I'm going to be sitting here just freaked out." But I took off out of that stool and I went next door to the what I want to say deli. It's not deli. The
Or
cafe.
the no,
Yeah, the
okay.
cafe. I went next door to the cafe and I pulled up a stool and sat down and just sat there and was like going, "What did I see? What did I see? What did I see?" And somebody comes up and they're like, "What's wrong with you?" I'm like, "I think I just saw a ghost." And they're like, "Yeah, you probably did. That's probably Old Red." And I'm like, "Who the hell is Old Red?" And they're like, "Well, he was a guy that was a mechanic here in the 70s and he was working on a car. He was underneath it. It fell off the lift and crushed him."
Oh boy.
And he's like, they're saying that sometimes the people that worked late at night would see him
Hmm.
go through stuff and just disappear. And I'm like, "Oh, goody." So 6 o'clock rolls around, my manager shows up, and I'm like, he's like, "You look like hell." And I'm like, "I feel like hell because weird stuff happens around here at night, and you were supposed to answer the phone." And he's like, "Well, don't get snippy with me. I want you to come back at your regular time." I'm like, "If I come back," but I did.
Oh, glutton for punishment.
I did,
Yeah, I
and
think that would have been not the paranormal thing would have driven me out, but the fact that the manager didn't answer his phone, that would have ticked me off and I wouldn't have come back. Yeah.
yeah, I
Yeah.
came back. Guy didn't show up again.
Uh,
Same scenario. 2:30 in the morning. I'm behind the counter. I'm doing my thing, and I'm like sitting there going, wondering if something's gonna happen. And if you're sitting behind the counter and you stare right in front of you, if you're looking right in front of you, you got your snacks on one side, your drinks on one side, and then it kind of doglegs back to payphones when they had payphones, but those are taken out. 2:30 rolls around. I see somebody come out of that corner and start walking down the candy aisle. And I'm like, "Oh, great. We must have had a driver come in and he's using the phone." Nope. It was him again. And he
wow.
stopped and he turned and he's looking. He looks like he's picking up the candy bars and looking at him. And the same thing. I turn. I just. It's automatic when you see somebody. You're supposed to say, "Can I help you?" I look up. I see him stop and going through things, and I go, "Can I help you?" And he turns and looks at me and goes and disappears
And he's
again.
gone.
And I slam my hand on the counter and I'm like, "Not again, not again." But I didn't go run next door. I was like, "All right, you made your point.
Right.
Just don't bother me. I won't bother you. And I'm out of here in a couple hours, so you can have it."
Yeah. That's interesting. It's so there's, I mean, Navy vessels, different places that I've served when I was in the service, and different, Navy vessels, just like Army, um, uh, all military like vessels, right? They're haunted. They're haunted. And because you develop an attachment for places you served, or airplanes you flew, or ships you were stationed on, just all of this stuff. And so there's a really famous uh, haunted aircraft at Castle Air Force Base in California. And that my dad had been on that aircraft several times. So when they're no longer capable of flight and they're put on display, they're called a static display. So they're not going to move again. I mean, they could be moved to a different base, I guess, but they're not capable of flight. And so they have this one aircraft at Castle Air Force Base that I don't know if it was a bomber. I have to look up the make of the aircraft again. I forget, but it's out in front so the public can go through it. Well, when my dad was in the aircraft, I guess he was helping doing something with the restoration of the plane. There's no instrumentation is all been removed. So it's you can see the cockpit and you can get into the cockpit and you can look around, but there's no wires. There's no electronics anymore. There's the panel is still there, like the instrument panel is still there, but
But
there's
there's
no
no gate.
electricity.
Yeah,
There's
no
no
gauges or
battery.
anything.
Yeah, well, the gauges are there, but I mean, all of the wiring has been stripped out because he probably
Ah,
stripped it out for other planes. You know what I mean? Back in the day, so it's kind of interesting. So you have the cockpit, you have all of the lights in the aircraft and everything else, but nothing can work. It can't work, and um, there's a guy that my dad knew was working on the static display, and he used to maintain it. And it was I don't know if he flew that type of aircraft or whatever, but he had this fondness for this aircraft, and he would be in there a lot. And he said, and members of the public and members of the Air Force who have gone in there to work on the plane during the restoration, they'd be in there, and all of a sudden, all the lights would turn on, and then it sounded like the props were starting to turn,
oh, that'd be
and they were getting chat. You get chatter of like World War II chatter through the radio, but the radio, it's not hooked to anything. There's no wiring. It still goes on to this day. It's a very, very, very famous aircraft that, I mean, people go there specifically to see if they can have an experience.
that would be that would be really killer and freaky at the same time.
Yeah, I would love it. It would be so cool to sit in there and yeah, my dad said he heard it sounded like they were flying. My
Oh,
dad was a pilot. So he said you could sit in there and it sounded like you were in air. Like the noise of the engines going and everything. He said it was just bananas. Lots of stuff like that. There's that. My own experiences, I've had so many that I don't even know how to like pare them down just because I've been in this field for so long that they're not necessarily my my ghost stories. That's investigations we've been on or but we did have growing up. I've talked a little bit about the house that I lived in growing up and how haunted it was. It was insanely haunted. And one of the apparitions in the house was a little old lady who would tuck me in every night as a kid. And no matter who was there, because my dad and mom entertained all the time, there was always dinner parties going on in the house, always. And uh, everybody would see her and they'd ask about her. Oh, was that Dottie, is that your mom? My mom's like, oh, no. I mean, everybody would see her as she walked down. She'd walk through the dining room and the living room and then down the hall and down to my bedroom to tuck me in. And it's weird because I moved bedrooms. This house was so massive that um, there were so many rooms in this house that every once in a while you'd get a wild hair and you're just like, I want that room now. And you'd go move all your stuff. And then that becomes your bedroom. But she always found me. So it wasn't a repetitive like haunt. It's not like she had a pattern. It was she always found me to tuck me in.
yeah, that's intelligent.
Yeah,
I
very
was gonna
intelligent, right?
I was gonna say, yeah, that's intelligent. I was gonna say the plane sounds like the brick tape theory. Like certain conditions will have to be met before something would happen. So,
Yeah, interesting,
but
huh?
that's a yeah, that's I wouldn't say it's actually it's kind of sweet but freaky, you know.
Uh I never really interacted with her. I never interacted with her, but everybody would see her in the house going to find me to tuck me in. So it never bothered me. It bothered a lot of our guests, but never bothered me. Um,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
had,
I could see how that could be off-putting. You'd be at a dinner party and you'd be like, "Oh, is that your mom?" You'd be like, "No." Well, who is it?
yeah,
Do you really want to know? Oh, don't tell me.
yeah. Well, everybody kind of knew my mom and what she did and her gifts and stuff. But it was always the new people they'd interact with like the movie studios, or somebody would come over and if they didn't know what her abilities, then it would freak them out. But everybody who was a regular at our house knew. They're like, oh yeah, that's just Dottie, and she attracts everything. So, but
Yeah, yeah. If you knew you like somebody new's coming over and you got all the friends over there and they know about her abilities and you're like, oh goody,
yeah,
that's so.
yeah. This will screw with them tonight. Watch their reaction. So we had that was just like an everyday occurrence. We've had so many things. We had for a time. My dad had a clothing store on Main Street of the little town we grew up in, and that clothing store also had somebody that would come through the door. The door would open and close. It was one of those, like a heavy glass door because it's the front of a on Main Street, so it's all a glass front. And those doors are heavy, so they didn't move on their own. And he had a bell on the door, and somebody had would open and close that door, and the bell would ring, and he'd glance up from whatever he's doing, and nobody would be there. So was it like a shop owner who had that business at one time? I don't know. It's just there's a lot of that in our lives, and a lot of that. It's kind of funny that my dad, for decades, oh, this stuff doesn't exist. This stuff, but he had his own experiences. Finally, he came clean, and he's like, yeah, yeah, yeah. But uh, yeah. So my dad passed away in 2020, not a COVID, and I have his little 1960 Volkswagen that I grew up driving. So I have the Volkswagen, and I was taking it out about a month ago, and I pull out of my driveway and down my little dirt road, and all of a sudden I hear his laughter, and I smelled he used like pomade hair wax. It's just what he did, you know?
Yeah,
And I smelled that, and I came to screeching halt. It was like, wow, I heard him and I smelled his hair stuff, and it was just so comforting. But then it was gone, just like that. And
yeah,
he's in my house, and he plays tricks on people when they come over when I have dinner parties. So,
yeah.
yeah.
That reminds me of after my dad passed for a while there. I'd come home from work and uh, it's always habit to come in, take your coat off, take your work stuff off, and go in. And I live with my mom. I help take care of her, so it's just habit to take your work stuff off, go and say hi to hi to mom, sit in my chair, and veg out on TV or whatever. And one night I come home from work and say hi to her and sit in my chair. And about 5 minutes later, she's like, "You smell that?" And I'm like, "Smell what?" She's like, "I smell cigarette smoke." And I'm like, "I smell it too." And she's like, "You been smoking?" I'm like, "No." Because at the time I'd been quit smoking. And I smelled it too. And I'm like, I know that smell. That's Winston cigarettes, my dad's absolute favorite when he used to smoke. And I'm like, Mom, that's dad. And she's like, well, how can you tell? And I'm like, because I can smell the brand of cigarettes he's smoking. And just as fast as we smelled it, it disappeared. And I'm like, yeah, he's just popping in and say hi.
Yeah.
And I thought that was weird. And then didn't think too much about it. And then went and visited my brother when he was living in Wyoming. And we were doing something, and I'm like, none of the kids, I didn't smoke. My brother and wife didn't, my brother and wife, my brother and his wife didn't smoke, and the kids were too young to smoke. But we were hanging out doing something, and she, I'm like, oh, I smell cigarette smoke, and it's Winston's. And my sister-in-law piped up, and she's just like, Dad, we love it when you visit, but you can't smoke in the house. And then it just disappeared. So that
Yeah.
was validation that he was popping in every once in a while and saying
Yeah.
hello. So
Yeah, that's pretty common on our investigations. People will tell us, I smelled this perfume, and that's happened with me with my mom's perfume. I smelled that one day, only once. Um, just little people will get that a lot. Well,
yeah,
my dad smoked a pipe, or mom's perfume, or the cigarette smoke, or whatever, that a smell that you associate with a person, right?
yeah, well,
And my dad's hair wax, and it'll come randomly through. And I think most of us have had those experiences, but we chalk it up to, nah, that didn't happen. Most people do, right? So, yeah.
yeah, well, kind of what freaked me out is like mom smelling burning something. Usually that's associated with stroke. So I was like,
Oh,
but then I smelled it too. I'm like,
hmm.
okay, so there's something going on. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, anyway, I think people listening to the podcast probably have had their own experiences, and I would love for them to share them with us. And they can get a hold of us through our Pocatello Paranormal Research Facebook page. They can you can send us a message on that. We would love to actually read your ghost stories on our podcast. I think that would be a lot of fun if
oh
people
yeah, that'd
submit
be
their
fun.
ghost. Yeah. I have a few that people have sent from the Enders Hotel, and I'm trying to collect more on the Enders. So, particularly if you've worked at the Enders Hotel and you have ghost stories, please let me know, because it's one of my favorite places to investigate. We've been there several times. I've gotten incredible evidence from that place. But any ghost stories that you have, I just had one of our listeners uh, write in and tell me about a ghost. Well, an encounter she had at a local diner in town, and it it freaked her out so badly she doesn't know if she'll ever go back. So I will read that encounter. I don't know that I'm going to say the name of the restaurant, because um, her encounter wasn't that great, and I don't want it. I don't want to do that to the restaurant. So, but we'll definitely read that once we get a few more ghost stories under our belt with people's writing into us.
Yeah,
So,
that'd be fun.
yeah. But as always, thanks everybody for listening to the podcast. We really enjoy our time with you, and we'll look forward to the next one. Signing off.
You've been listening to Speaking of Spirits, powered by Pocatello Paranormal Research in Pocatello, Idaho. Thank you for joining us today. We're glad you could be here. If you're enjoying the podcast, please do us a favor and go to whatever platform you are listening to the podcast on and give us a review. We prefer the 5-star reviews. This helps us know how we're doing, and it helps others to find the podcast. Thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you on our next podcast.